Thank you very much, Kate. Can everyone hear me even at the back? And thank you all for making the right decision for this time slot. Now, why 50 Shades of Sugar? Because of the many different lights in which sugar is presented in both science and the media. Because of sugar's shady reputation in relation to our health and obesity crisis. Because of the more than 50 different names for sugar sprinkled liberally throughout our food supply. And because the shady story of sugar begins in mid-1950. So what are you going to gain from this session? I came up with 10 questions that I felt were really critical to answer. So let me give you my questions and then I will invite your questions. Together we'll put our questions together and then we'll go for one hell of a ride for the next 75 minutes. So here are the things that I think are critical to know and answer about sugar. And let me know if I've covered them for you. So number one, what exactly do we mean when we say sugar? Because it's used in a lot of different contexts and sometimes incorrectly. Does the body process different sugars differently? If so, how? And what's the significance of this? Thirdly, why is there so much controversy around sugar? Is it possible for a human being from memory to rattle off more than 50 different names for sugar in 60 seconds? Is sugar really that bad for us? Can sugar be addictive? Why are scientists calling sugar the new booze and cigarettes and soft drinks the new cigarettes? What about artificial sweeteners? Are they any better for us? Why is the World Health Organization stipulating a safe upper limit for sugar consumption like it is for alcohol consumption? And what are the ultimate take-home messages for ourselves and for our clients? So that's pretty much my set of questions. Let's flip them on. That's why I'm here, to answer these. Why are you here? What do you want to learn? And what are your burning questions around sugar? Is there anything I haven't covered? Excellent. Well, then let's get started. And feel free to ask questions throughout the whole afternoon. So, in 1950, 12% of the American population was classified as obese. Now, 12%, just over 1 in 7. In 1980, that's 30 years later, 15% of Americans were classified as obese. That's 3% more, or an increase of 1% per decade. Then in 2000, 20 years later, suddenly 35% of Americans were classified obese. Hold it, we went from 1% increase per decade to 10% increase per decade. What happened in 1980 that made obesity levels soar? Let's look at what was happening in the UK at roughly the same time. Between 1950 and 1980, their obesity levels stayed pretty steady at a mere 6% of the population. Then in the year 2000, it jumped to almost 20%, a trebling. What was going on? And the figures in Australia show a similar jump. Can anyone hazard a guess as to what went on between 1980 and beyond to make obesity levels rise to such a great degree? Yes?
Got fat phobic and pulled down the fat and then the sugar increased, and that's one.
Absolutely. I can tell teacher's pet the minute he walks in the room. Excellent. Yes, we started eating less fat and more sugar. So the next question is why? Why do we do that? Yes?
Well, it's a far more sedentary lifestyle.
It is, but why did we start eating less fat and more sugar? We were told to, exactly. In 1980, this is one of the greatest ironies in human history. In 1980, the United States government, after long consultation with its top nutritional scientists, issued its first dietary guidelines, telling people what they should eat for optimal health. And their chief advice was lower the fat, increase the carbohydrates. How could they possibly get it so wrong? That's absurd. And the consequence, it would be hilarious if it wasn't so devastating. So the question is, how did they get it so wrong? Why? The answer is a great mystery story. So, hold on to your hats and listen as the story unfolds. Like all stories, we've got a hero and a villain. Our hero is a man by the name of John Yudkin. Has anyone heard of Professor John Yudkin? Terrific. Our villain is a compound by the name of sugar. Has anyone heard of? Probably. Professor John Yudkin. He was a Russian Jew. His parents migrated to escape the pogroms in 1905. He was born in 1910 in London's East End. Unfortunately, John's father died when he was only 6 years old, and his mother raised him and his 4 boys in poverty. But John Yudkin was a very smart little boy, and he obtained a scholarship to his local grammar school, which led to Cambridge University, which led to him obtaining not 1 but 3 degrees, and they were biochemistry, physiology and medicine. He knew his stuff. After serving in World War II in the medical corps, he was then made Professor of Queen Elizabeth College in London, and he headed England's top nutritional department, and in fact it became internationally renowned. And one of the first things that John Yudkin and his colleagues noticed was the strong correlation between heart disease and sugar consumption, not heart disease and fat consumption. So he actually did a whole series of laboratory studies. In 1957, he put forward the hypothesis that sugar was a health hazard, was a big public health hazard. They knew about the effects on tooth decay, that was already well known, but they didn't know of the wider health implications. So he was one of the first that actually demonstrated in the lab that we can actually convert sugar into fat, that we can convert fructose into triglycerides. He studied sucrose, which is table sugar, which is your glucose plus fructose. I'll get more into the biochemistry of sugar shortly, but I just want to explain what he did. He and his colleagues did a whole heap of experiments that found that sugar leads to increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, gout, eye disease, widespread inflammation, a whole host of diseases that we now recognise, but at that time were all new. Now, what strikes me is I was not taught any of that in medical school more than 20 years ago. I know, looking at me, you're probably thinking it was 2 years ago, but it was 20 years ago. This is well after John Yudkin had done all his research, yet I wasn't taught it and it was ignored. Why? Before we answer that, please stand up. Because we all know that we were very under a hit, and one of the things that mitigates the negative effects of sugar on our bodies is even just a 40-second hit before every meal. You know, they've done studies on a wide range of the population. Just 40 seconds before every meal will lower the insulin spike, will improve your insulin sensitivity and helps diabetics improve their blood sugar levels. So, just so that you remember it, let's do a 40-second hit right now. I'm going to watch the timer here. Ready, steady, run as fast as you can on the spot. Go. I'm watching. I've got to be the timekeeper here. Okay. Keep going. Keep going. 20 seconds to go. Doesn't feel like the longest 20 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. Excellent. You can sit down now. Okay. So before I answer the question, why was John Yudkin's research ignored, let's define sugar so we're all on the same page. Sugar is a class of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are compounds consisting of, as the name suggests, carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. And usually the hydrogen-oxygen ratio is 2:1, so it's like water. Now, sugars are a specific class of carbohydrates, and they happen to be sweet, short-chain, soluble carbohydrates. Now, there are 4 chemical groups of carbohydrates depending on their size or how many chains they have. And sugars refer to the first 2 groups, monosaccharides and disaccharides. But I'll run through all of them so you understand the difference. So monosaccharides are your single-chain carbohydrates. Can anyone give me some examples of monosaccharides? The 3 monosaccharides that we eat, that are in nature, are glucose, fructose, galactose. So they are our 3 monosaccharides. The second type are your disaccharides. So they have 2 chains, so it's 2 monosaccharides linked together with a bond. Can you give me some examples of disaccharides? Sucrose, the most common one, that's glucose plus fructose. Lactose, glucose plus galactose. One more, maltose, glucose plus glucose. So monosaccharides are the building blocks of the other carbohydrates. The third group of carbohydrates are your oligosaccharides. They have 3 to 9 chains. They are not the villains in this story. Oligosaccharides have a wide range of functions in the body. Very often they're bound to proteins in glycoproteins or fats in glycolipids, and they're often on the surface of our cells throughout our bodies. And what they do is they modulate the immune response, they determine our blood type. They are part of a whole range of different chemical functions. I'm just telling you for completeness. That's your oligosaccharides. And your polysaccharides have 10 or more monosaccharides joined together. And again, they have a wide range of functions. throughout the body, but the two main ones are one, storage of energy in plants and animals. And in plants, that storage of energy is in the form of starch, and in animals it's in the form of glycogen. And the other function of carbohydrate, of polysaccharides, is structure in plants, and it's chitin and it's cellulose, and it serves as fibre in our diet. And no discussion of sugar is complete without a discussion of fibre, so later we'll talk about fibre as well. But are you all with me so far? Okay, and the way the different types of monosaccharides are joined together, that gives the different carbohydrates their different properties. And I want to emphasise the point that sugar refers to the first two groups, monosaccharides and disaccharides. So glucose, fructose, galactose, sucrose, sucrose, lactose, and maltose. They are our 6 sugars. Okay, now even within the same group, different sugars are processed differently and metabolised differently in the body. So let's take glucose and fructose. They have the same chemical structure, C6H12O6, the same number of carbohydrate and oxygen atoms. However, they are handled very differently in the body. And this difference is absolutely critical, because when you understand this, you will be able to make wise decisions about all the carbohydrates that you consume. So let's take the first example. Let's look at what happens to pure glucose. So let's take our starch, a bowl of white rice. Let's take 120 calories of white rice. You eat this, what happens? When you eat the glucose, when it enters your bloodstream, it triggers the release of insulin. When insulin comes on board, it's a protein that carries the glucose to where it needs to go in the body. 80% of the glucose goes to all your different organs to give them energy. 20% of the glucose goes to your liver. Now, of that 20%, some of it is immediately handled by the mitochondria. They are little subparticles within cells that produce energy. So some of that glucose going to the liver is immediately used as energy, but the majority is actually converted into glycogen for storage. All good so far. So 80%, body's burning it as fuel when you're running, doing whatever you have to do. 20% goes to the liver. Most of it is converted to glycogen, so that when your energy levels are low, when you haven't had food for a while, it'll break down that glycogen. You can use that as energy. Now, if you eat too much glucose, the liver will turn it into triglycerides and convert it to fat. If you eat even more glucose than that, then it will bind to proteins, and it can make the proteins less flexible, which leads to aging. And it can cause build-up of some toxins and chemicals. But you have to eat a lot of glucose in order to put on a lot of weight and have negative effects on the body, because most of the organs can deal with it. We're all good so far. All right, now let's look at what happens. Sorry, I should have put up that slide. What happens to fructose when you eat exactly the same number of calories of fructose? Now, in nature, fructose largely occurs as the disaccharide sucrose. So remember, sucrose is glucose plus fructose. So an example of 120 calories of sucrose would be just almost a cup of orange juice. So when you drink that orange juice, what you're now taking on board is 60 calories of glucose, 60 calories of fructose. Now, the glucose is handled in the way I just described. 80% of that 60 calories goes to all the cells, 20% goes to the liver. All good so far. What happens to that fructose? There is no organ except the liver that can handle fructose. Herein lies the problem. So your liver suddenly is bombarded with all this fructose. What does the liver do with it? Well, it just can't handle the load. So firstly, the mitochondria, which would otherwise have converted the glucose to energy, it's just too much, and they start to produce waste products. And they start to get depleted, the cells start to get depleted of ATP. And it also induces the formation of the liver enzyme, which causes widespread inflammation throughout the body. One of the toxins that fructose metabolism produces is uric acid. You know what happens when our uric acid levels rise? Gout and high blood pressure. This is one of the reasons that fructose can cause increasing cardiovascular disease. What else does it do? That inflammation throughout our body is responsible for diabetes, cancer, dementia, kidney disease, you name it, inflammation, we're thinking is probably at the bottom of it. And of course, all the excess fructose gets converted into triglycerides, which is laid down as abdominal fat. So our liver, our pancreas, our abdominal organs are infiltrated with fat. This is the problem. Can you see the immediate difference between glucose and fructose? Now, just to visually represent this, could I have a volunteer liver, please? You look like a nice liver, please. Okay, so, and because this is kind of, the biochemistry is quite tricky, but I'm trying to make it really digestible, and you can show this to your client. So, stand over here. Your name? Barry. Thank you, Barry. And I'm going to have the first two rows represent the other organs in the body. So Barry's the liver, and you guys are kidneys, heart, muscles, pancreas. Okay, so let's start with our glucose. Here I have 10 balls. They all represent 10% of our glucose. So what happens? I eat the glucose, and we know that 20% is going to go to Barry, and 80% is going to go to you. So here, you've got to catch the ball. Okay, and then we've got, say, pancreas there, we've got muscles there, we've got all our different organs. And then Barry, you ready? Okay. And then these are nicely distributed to all our other organs. Could you handle that, Barry? Good. Okay, I'll have it back now. Now, this time, we're going to have the fructose. So Barry, once again, represents the liver, and you guys represent the other organs. With the fructose, you guys get nothing. Barry gets everything. Here, Barry, catch. Barry, here's the ball. You can't have it. This is too much. This is what's happening to the liver with the fructose. It just drops the ball. You can't metabolize it quickly enough. Thank you very much for your cooperation. So the point I want to make is not all calories... they're right, we'll keep them there. I'll try not to fall over them. Not all calories are equal. If you eat that, like when I was in medicine, I was taught, this is doctor, medicine, taught, doesn't matter what they eat as long as they keep their calories down. So you could go on the Mars bar diet, and as long as it was, 1,000 or so calories, you'd still lose weight on it. Unfortunately, you might lose weight on it because you're not having that many calories, but you would be producing a lot of abdominal fat. So even if two things have the same number of calories, we've got to remember that all calories are not equal. The body handles them very differently. So now that you know that, you can decide, when you know roughly whether something's got a lot of sucrose versus glucose, that sucrose is going to be producing triglycerides, abdominal fat, predisposing people to disease. Okay. And herein lies the issue. It's a dose-dependent effect. A little bit of fructose can be handled by the body. It's the volume of fructose that we're now consuming that's the problem. I come from Queensland, and the Courier Mail headline yesterday, as I was getting on the plane, I was reading that we're addicted to sugar. We knew that, but that, there are some young Australian boys eating 30 teaspoons of sugar a day. And the World Health Organisation is stipulating a safe level for boys would be 9 teaspoons a day. So, this is a horrifying statistic that today, in a developed country, by the time the average child is 8 years old, they've eaten more sugar than a person would have eaten in their entire lifetime a century ago. Interestingly, and this is why scientists are calling sugar the new booze, the way the liver handles fructose is quite similar, not the same, but similar to the way it handles ethanol, which is alcohol. So you know that when you drink too much alcohol, you'll get a fatty liver, predisposes to liver cancer. Same thing happens with fructose. You eat too much fructose, you get a fatty liver, and your liver looks like you're an alcoholic. The other problem with fructose is a master of disguise. And it comes by so many different names that so many people don't even realise how much sugar they're eating. So I said at the start that there are more than 50 different names for sugar used in food labels, and 46 of those sugars contain fructose. Do you want to hear them all? You have to. I've spent days practicing this. So, can I have a drum roll, please? Pressure's on, because this is being filmed. Okay, the 46 different words for fructose. And it's going to disappoint some of you, because I think you're going to think, oh, but I thought that was healthy. Okay, it helps me if I count. Agave nectar, Barbados sugar, beet sugar, brown sugar, cane sugar, caster sugar, coconut sugar, confectioner's sugar, date sugar, demerara sugar, granulated sugar, grape sugar, golden sugar, icing sugar, invert sugar, muscovado sugar, organic sugar, palm sugar, raw organic sugar, superfine sugar, table sugar, turbinado sugar, yellow sugar, buttered syrup, carob syrup, high fructose corn syrup, golden syrup, maple syrup, refiner syrup, sorghum syrup, fruit juice concentrate, evaporated cane juice crystals, blackstrap molasses, ordinary molasses, pinoca, Florida crystals, honey, treacle, caramel, and of course your fructose, your crystalline fructose, sucrose, sucralose. 46. Just for completeness, would you like to hear the 14 other sugars that have more glucose but not fructose, and therefore, so that the 14 sugars I'm now going to list don't have fructose, so if you have to choose your sugars, choose them from this list in preference. All your malts, like your maltose, your maltobiose, maltodextrin, ethyl maltol, diastatic malt, obviously your glucose solids, your dextran, diatase. We've got a couple of others. Sorry. Oh, that's right. Rice syrup, malt syrup. That's pretty much all the others. So there you have your sugars. Does anyone struggle to fall asleep at night? Forget counting sheep, start counting sugar. Far more effective. You'll fall asleep in a flash. So we understand now how our sugars are metabolised. So let's get back to our story. The plot thickens. In 1955, US President Dwight Eisenhower had a heart attack. And the next day, his physician, Dr. Paul Dudley White, gave a press conference in which he once again announced how Americans were to avoid heart attacks. And what did he say? Don't smoke and don't eat fat. No mention of sugar. Now, this advice was obviously not based on the work of Professor John Yudkin, but was based on the opinion of a charismatic, combative epidemiologist from Minnesota called Ancel Keys. Now, Ancel Keys had a lot of clout because he actually had the food industry backing him, and he was loud. And where he was, out there, charismatic, unfortunately, John Yudkin was the mild-mannered Clark Kent. And Ancel Keys' strength came from a bogus study he did called the 7-country study, in which he selectively looked at 7 countries, which was America, Finland, Holland, Greece, Yugoslavia, Italy and Japan, and he said based on what they're eating, it's obvious that fat is the problem and not sugar. Meanwhile, and so this was in about 1970, meanwhile in 1972, Professor John Yudkin put out a brilliant, meticulously researched book called Pure, White and Deadly, in which he described all his studies and experiments which showed how harmful sugar was. But unfortunately, a lone voice in the age before social media remains a lone voice. And poor Professor John Yudkin was actually systematically silenced, not killed, just silenced and discredited until his death in 1995, not of a heart attack. He was aged 85. By the way, President Eisenhower, despite following the advice of not eating fat and eating more carbohydrates, he still died of a heart attack. Again, you've got to ask yourself. This would be a very sad ending if the story finished here, but fortunately it doesn't. The truth ultimately prevails, and as Lily Tomlin put it, the best mind-altering drug is the truth. John Yudkin might have died, but his spirit did not. It was reignited in another professor, this time an American called Robert Lustig. Before we go on, let's get up out of our chair again. Just because the brain works so much better when we're moving, let's have another quick hit. Give you 30 seconds this time. Ready, set, go, run along the spot as fast as you can. Okay, terrific. And just a quick quiz to get your neurons firing. Bob has 36 candy bars. He eats 29. What does he now have? Diabetes, exactly. All right, so our second hero now is Dr. Robert Lustig. He is a paediatric endocrinologist. Who's heard of Robert Lustig? Okay. Now, he finally repeated the studies that John Yudkin had. He actually had never heard of John Yudkin until he gave a lecture to Adelaide biochemists. And at the end of that lecture, somebody said, and he put forward all the same sort of research. He started because he saw children under the age of 10 having fatty liver disease, and he started believing that their parents were alcoholics and that the kids were drinking their parents' alcohol. And when he actually investigated, he said that wasn't the case at all. It was the fact that the kids were eating so much sugar. And it wasn't even in ice creams and chocolates, it was in processed food. More about that shortly. And herein lies the problem. It was that even though the US dietary guidelines didn't tell people to eat more sugar specifically, the fact that they told people to eat less fat, and the food industry followed suit by trying to produce palatable food. If you remove the fat, what do you have to do to make it palatable? You have to add the sugar. The sugar doesn't just add sweetness, it improves shelf life, and it also gives it a nice mouthfeel, so it actually has a nice texture. So what Robert Lustig then did was he looked at the research and he found that it was, once again, sugar was the problem. And then when somebody in Adelaide said to him, mate, John Yudkin did all this 40 years ago, that's when Robert Lustig went and found the book Pure, White and Deadly once again, because it had been out of print, and he had it republished in 2012. You can buy it now, Pure, White and Deadly, with an introduction by Robert Lustig. So now we finally know, and there's no doubt, even though the food industry will try to deny it, there is no doubt that sugar could be classified a toxin in high doses. Just the easiest way to think about it is sugar is the new booze. In the same way that you're going to limit, that you probably limit your alcohol consumption, we need to start limiting our sugar consumption, and I'll explain exactly how shortly. But I just want to tell you that we've done loads of experiments now where we feed rats sucrose. What happens? They get a fatty liver, they produce triglycerides, they're more likely to have a heart attack. And decades after that fatally flawed 7 countries study, the lead Italian researcher went back and reviewed the research, and what did he say? Oops. I don't know how we could have missed the fact that it was sugar and not fat that was the problem. And it was reviewed in Time magazine as well. So where do we stand now in terms of sugar? I've said it before, so I won't labour the first one. Sugar is the new booze. Secondly, that soft drinks are the new cigarettes. Thirdly, the World Health Organization, the American Heart Foundation have both said we have to start educating the public on their upper level of sugar consumption, and the Australian government is still twiddling its thumbs on the issue, but it'll get on board. And we, as a profession, as an industry, I think need to be at the forefront in helping this nation wean itself off sugar. How do we go about it? I personally believe, and a lot of my colleagues agree, that the same debates that we had about cigarettes a few decades ago, we're going to have the same debates about soft drinks. There is no safe level of soft drink consumption, because when we drink soft drinks, they're all sucrose. They are such a high volume of sucrose, they just get converted straight into triglycerides. And there is a brilliant book by Michael Moss, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. He actually went behind the scenes and interviewed the CEO of Coca-Cola and all the other soft drink industries and the food processing companies. And behind closed doors, off records, which then became on record because he wrote the book, they admit that sugar is a toxin. However, too much money is wedded to keeping sugar off the hook. So they're going to fight tooth and nail, just like the tobacco companies did. I don't believe... Sorry?
Sugar today, like once the tobacco companies were the biggest smoke power
Yes.
companies in the world, now in America, the number one company with most power is sugar.
Yes, and you know that... exactly. And a lot of the food companies have actually been bought by what was previously the leading tobacco company. Now, I don't think anybody set out to poison humanity. I don't think that was the case. I think in all good faith, the food companies started adding sugar because they had to pull out the fat, because that's what the US dietary guidelines were telling them to do. It was a mistake. And I think we just need to own, like, everybody involved just has to say, look, we made a mistake. Let's work together to turn this around. And rather than blaming the food companies, because they're just going to dig their heels in. And I think that the way around it is the way they're going to respond is if we stop drinking the soft drinks, if we stop buying the processed food, and if we get back to basic more home cooking. So, I highly recommend you read this book because it's so telling and so revealing and straight from the horse's mouth. And Jeffrey Dunn, former CEO of Coca-Cola, admits if you look at the graph showing the rise in obesity and if you look at the graph showing the rise in soft drink consumption, they are exactly parallel. He admits. Do you know why Jeffrey Dunn resigned as CEO of Coca-Cola? Because he couldn't live with himself. Because when he went to South America and saw how their marketing lured people who didn't have the education, didn't know, he went back and he resigned. That's how bad the situation is. Okay. Of course, you read that book after you've read this book. What are some of the specific things we found about soft drinks? If you change nothing in your life, you continue to do how much exercise you're doing, you continue to eat what you're eating, but you simply add 1 can of Coke or 1 can of something, soft drink a day, you will add 6 to 7 kilos by the end of the year, each year, and you will increase your risk of diabetes by 22%. They found that men who drank 2+ sugary drinks a day had an 85% increased risk of gout compared to those who drank soft drinks once a month or less. The reason I say that also soft drinks are like cigarettes is because even passive soft drink drinking gives the message that it's okay. Because if everyone's doing it, it can't be that bad. So we have to shift that mindset. If a child sees adults drinking soft drinks, it can't be that bad. So I invite you to think about, and I'm going to pause at this moment, just get you to turn to the person sitting next to you and shake their hand and say congratulations for coming to this session. And say to them, just have a minute to think about how might you encourage your community, or even you, if you have been drinking a lot of soft drink, how can we start to get this message out? How can we start to drink less soft drinks? What do you think we can do? Just take a minute or two to get the conversation started. Would anyone like to share an idea? Would anyone like to share an idea or just even offer a comment or ask a question at this point?
Education is lead by example.
Yes, I totally agree. Education is leading by example.
I thought seeing Coke make, I think it's Mount Franklin and Vitamin Water anyway, sub that in for kids half time because they still make a profit and they get exposure.
Yep.
So they're not completely losing and the kids get, 100 times less sugar.
Yeah. Yeah, good idea. Is this what I've said so far? I just want to get everyone on the same page. Have you heard all this before? Is this new? Is this sort of just providing some detail? Okay, terrific. All right, now we've identified the problem. What's the solution? Well, one simple solution is just, you just use your soft drinks for something different. Coke is great for cleaning blood off concrete. When we had blood spills in the hospital, and just get some Coke, or mould off wood. So you could just shift the soft drinks to the laundry. That's just one idea. Second question, yes.
Just asking a question from a medical perspective.
Yeah.
My son was eating some salmon the other night. Got just a tiny little bone stuck in his throat. Took him to the emergency room, and they said, "Have you given him Coke?"
Because it can dissolve the bone. I don't know that it would happen that quickly, or maybe just the bubbles.
I've seen the same with a kid had a coin stuck in his throat. And he had 3 or 4 cans.
Yeah. Look, that is a perfectly valid use of it for medicinal reasons. But like all medicines, there are side effects. So, I think the next question we need to ask is sugar addictive? Is sugar addictive? As a matter of fact, it is. And how is it addictive? Because when we eat a lot of sugar, so I'm talking, your sucrose, we've defined it. A lot of sugar, what it does is it actually gets taken to an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. It's the pleasure centre. It gives it a massive dose. It sets off dopamine. And once you have a huge output of dopamine, it actually reduces the pleasure that you get from other things and you start craving more. Now, here's the thing. There are no addictive formulations of sugar in nature. The only foods that have addictive amounts of sugar and fat, and the combination is also highly, highly addictive, are processed foods, particularly where there is an equal ratio of fat and sugar, where you've got 50% sugar, 50% fat, and a prime example is your iced glazed donuts. That, you eat that and you go, oh my God. Foods have been formulated to give the optimal sweetness, and it's called the bliss point. I believe if the amount of time, energy, brains and money that we put in, society, the food industry puts into making foods addictive, if that was diverted to cancer research, I reckon we'd have a cure for cancer by now. Because of so much time and effort is put into making these foods not just palatable, but hyper-palatable. And in fact, in Coca-Cola, they use the parlance of addiction. They don't just talk about clients, they talk about people with a habit. People who drink more than 2 soft drinks a day are people with a habit, and they're heavy users. So what they've actually done is they found that when you get the optimal point of sugar, it's called the bliss point, and that's the point, and they test it on person after person after person. When they do studies on rats and they feed them junk food, they find that it actually causes overeating and binge eating, and they ignore their normal foods, and they actually will go for the sugar more than they'll go for any other pleasures, even cocaine. Particularly that combination of fat and sugar together, not just sugar even alone. And the optimal level of fat in a food is called the mouthfeel. Sometimes fat can get too fatty, but they found the optimal where it's just got that beautiful texture where you just want more. That's the mouthfeel. So sugar can actually be addictive. And I'll talk about how we get off sugar addictions. What about artificial sugars? Are they any better for our health? What do we think? Why not? Artificial sugars, but they can't be absorbed. The whole point of artificial sugars is they give us no calories because we cannot absorb them, so they do not enter our bloodstream. Sorry?
It's more about how you're going to process it.
Well, they don't enter our bodies, except our gut. And what researchers have now found is that when we eat artificial sugars, they did study, one of the first studies was done on rats where they were fed saccharin, sucralose and aspartame. And when these rats were fed these artificial sugars, suddenly they found there was a change in their gut flora. You know that we have more bacteria in our gut than we have cells in our bodies. And gut flora is going to be one of the next major players in the fitness, the health, the body fat industry. What they found was that artificial sugars change our gut flora, encourage the growth of gut flora that are not so good for us, that actually reduce our insulin sensitivity and predispose to diabetes. And when they translated their studies to humans, they've done numerous studies now on large numbers of people. They looked at firstly 9,500 adults. They followed them for 9 years. And those that drank diet soft drinks, 40% of them developed metabolic syndrome. Those that did not drink artificial soft drink did not have that same increase in metabolic syndrome. They looked at another study in Mexico, largely, where they looked at 749 subjects. Again, they studied them for 9 years, and they found that artificial sugar consumption, primarily in the form of diet soft drinks, the more diet soft drinks they drank, the larger their waist circumference. That's a direct measure of your abdominal fat. And they found that those who drank the most, which was two or more a day, had an 8 centimetre increase in their waist circumference versus those who did not drink the artificial soft drinks, and they had a 2 centimetre increase. This is very significant. So what have we actually found? Can this be reversed? The good news is it can. And the medicine of the future is poo transplants. Because what they found was one thing they could do was they could wipe out the gut flora of the sick rats with antibiotics. And when they allowed them to regrow with good food, they got back their normal flora. But I'm not really into wiping out your gut flora with antibiotics. That is filled with its own problems. But what they did find was when they got healthy mice and they got fecal transplants, they got feces out of the healthy mice and they transplanted it into the diabetic mice, it reversed their diabetes, it improved their insulin sensitivity. And I'm quite serious. Until recently, I lived in Five Dock in Sydney, and this was on the front door of one of the medical practices. They actually are. We're doing so much research now on fecal matter. You could look, you know, if classes are a bit slow, you can earn a little bit of extra income. All right, so what then? So we've established that unfortunately artificial sweeteners are actually no better for us. I know somebody's going to ask me about stevia and the natural ones. I think if you have a stevia plant on your in a little pot on your windowsill, use the leaf. At this point, it seems safe, but it's too early days. We haven't done enough studies, and I don't like the idea of stevia being from a green leaf to a white powder. That bothers me somehow because something's happened to it in the process. So, what does the World Health Organization say are the safe levels of sugar? Does anyone know? You'll hear different reports, but the latest report is the following. Okay, both correct. The World Health Organization says a safe level for men is 9 teaspoons of added sugar a day. The safe level for women is 6 teaspoons of added sugar a day, and the safe level for children is 4. They talk about 10% of your daily allowance, of your daily calories, but that means nothing to people. So I think the easiest thing is to say, this is how many teaspoons you need. In a moment, I'll show you how you can teach your clients to calculate how much sugar they're consuming. And this can actually be a lot of fun, and kids will lead the way. I encourage all of you to go into your local primary school and you offer them just half an hour teaching kids how to count how to calculate the sugar in what they're eating. They will love this in a moment. But I just want to make the point that it's not all bad news. There is good news. There are 5 antidotes. There are 5 antidotes to fructose. As Robert Lustig said, when nature invented a poison, which was fructose, it packaged it with its antidote. What's its first antidote? Fibre, exactly. Fructose is balanced by fibre. In nature, if you've got a fruit which has a lot of fructose, it also tends to be quite high in fibre. So, and one of the first things that fibre does is bulk food up. You know, you can't eat all of that in one sitting, but you certainly can eat all of that. So what is fibre? Fibre, also known as roughage, is the indigestible portion of plants. So fibre is only found in plant foods, and it's found in fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, beans, that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's where your fibre is found. There are 2 types of fibre, soluble and insoluble. As the name suggests, soluble dissolves in water, insoluble does not. Now, we can't digest the fibre, so its destination is the toilet. Why then is it so important if it's something that passes straight through us? The answer again...
Drags out cholesterol.
It does. It drags out cholesterol by dragging out bile acids. Also, our gut flora love it. It keeps the bacteria in our guts healthy. And the 2 different fibres have different roles in our bodies, and we need both of them. Now, paleobiologists have estimated that paleo man ate about 100 grams of fibre a day. How much are we recommended?
30 to 40.
About 30 to 40. Most people would be lucky to get half that. Now, the beauty of fibre is that together, I think it's one of our best medicines. And one of the first things about fibre, we'll look at soluble fibre first. Soluble fibre is usually made up of glucose chains. something like chitin. And when you eat something with soluble fibre, it absorbs water, e.g. your oats or your beans. So it absorbs water. So the first thing it does is it makes you feel fuller faster, and it slows gastric emptying. So the minute you feel fuller faster, you're going to eat less. The other thing about the soluble fibre, it delays stomach emptying. And the soluble fibre is what takes out the bile acids, so it lowers your cholesterol. The insoluble fibre forms more like a physical barrier, so you don't absorb as much of the calories in a food. And the insoluble fibre is that stringy part of celery, the stuff around your whole grains, whole being the operative word. So it's your brown rice, your whole wheat. So soluble fibre is found in oats, barley, lentils, chia, most fruits, a lot of vegetables. And the insoluble fibre is, as I said, the husks around your grains. The only side effect of your soluble fibre is, unfortunately, when it gets to the colon, it's fermented by gut bacteria and it produces embarrassing social gases. So you have to make that defining choice. Do you want to be fat or fart? Okay, now what I'd like to do is actually demonstrate how fibre protects us against fructose. So if I could have our liver back, and I'd like 5 people to help me demonstrate fibre. So would you mind? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want you to stand in front of Barry. Facing me, holding hands. No. Also, all of you stand in front of Barry. Now remember what happened when we ate that, when we had that pure sucrose, pure fructose. It was just all of this being thrown, all of the fructose being thrown at Barry. However, if the food has fibre, so the orange as opposed to the orange juice, what happens? There's a barrier. The soluble fibre, the insoluble fibre forms the physical barrier, and the soluble fibre kind of fills the gaps. Now, some will get through, but a lot of it will not. And as I said, in nature, the amount of fructose is balanced by the amount of fibre. Thank you very much. Actually, I want to do one more thing, if you stay up one more time. What then happens... What then happens when we juice... we went too far. What happens when we juice our fruit? And they all fell down.
Really? I don't turn silent.
No. So drop down. Go straight for Barry. Thank you very much. I just want to make this visual so that you would remember it. So when we juice our fruit and we get the pure juice, all the fibre has been removed. You might as well be just drinking sugar dissolved in water. I'm sorry. And I know Boost Juice had every good intention when it's, all these juice bars have every good intention because fruit and veg have a lot of great nutrients. But eat it rather than drink it. What about those fantastic whiz-bang machines that retain the fibre? Unfortunately, many of them, the shearing action of the blade absolutely disintegrates the fibre. The insoluble fibre. You'll still get the soluble fibre, so you get some of the benefit, but you won't get the insoluble fibre, so you still get a larger load than if you were eating it. Now, you can still have some juices if you choose your ingredients wisely. Like your green veggies, there's not a lot of sugar in them. But if you have, your apple juice, your orange juice, the other thing too, how many apples can you eat in one sitting? 2 maybe, 1. How many apples go into a juice? Minimum of 4, probably 6. So can we understand why firstly fibre, we've done the liver, why fibre is the first big antidote to fructose. And the problem with the food industry is it's taken the fibre, the definition of processed food is largely removing the fibre and adding sugar. Therein lies the problem with processed food. Okay, so now it's time to play hide and seek. The food industry tries to hide the sugar, and it's our job to find the sugar. Do you know how you would calculate how much sugar is in what you're eating? Would you be, if I said, you know, could you just go to the supermarket now and calculate how much sugar you're eating? I'll run you through it because it's really simple and it's something to teach everybody you know. So, now, by the way, you don't have to calculate the amount of sugar in natural foods, naturally occurring foods, because as I said, it's balanced. But let's take any processed food. Let's take a breakfast cereal, for instance. You go to the back of the pack, and usually the label has 2 columns, per serving, yes, and per 100 grams. Are we aware of that? Let's take an example. These craisins, which was dried raisins, which were dried cranberries, which were well-meaningly given to me on an aircraft recently. So anyway, we've got our 2 columns. And they you know, the list of the calories, the proteins, the fats, the carbohydrates, and they do split the carbohydrates into subset of sugars. So you immediately read how many sugars are in that breakfast cereal, that muesli bar, whatever it is you've got. Does anyone know how many grams in a teaspoon of sugar? Just over 4. But to make the maths easy, 4 is the closest approximation. So every 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon. So if you want to look at your per serving, and you go, okay, per serving, let's say this breakfast cereal has 20 grams of sugar. 20 grams of sugar, which is not actually unreasonable. How many teaspoons has that serving got? 5. That's more than a child's daily limit, and it's almost a woman's daily limit. And often they're clever, and then you look at how big is the serving. Half the time the serving, I'd have 3, you know, in order to actually fill me up. So you might be actually getting 40, as in 10 teaspoons of sugar in that, what you call a serving, but not what they call a serving. Does that make sense? So you look at your 2 columns, divide the grams by 4, then you get your number of teaspoons of sugar that you're having. Now, just to complicate things a little bit, dairy products contain lactose. You don't have to count lactose in your daily sugar allowance because the body doesn't handle it in the same way that it does fructose. Now, a percentage of the population will be lactose intolerant. But a lot of people now from Europe and even a lot of Asia now are no longer lactose intolerant because we've developed the gene that allows us to digest dairy throughout our lives. So if you're lactose intolerant, you don't have to worry about it at all because you won't be eating dairy. But if you like your dairy, straight milk, straight yogurt doesn't have any sucrose in it. As long as it's unflavoured, you don't have to bother calculating the sugar in your milk because it's lactose, or the sugar in your yogurt, or the sugar in your cheese. If you go to America, by the way, cottage cheese has sugar in it. What are they thinking? Everything has sugar in it, so you do have to watch it. As for your flavoured yogurts, for each 100 grams or 100 millilitres of dairy, you have 2 to 8% is going to be lactose. So you can subtract that 2 to 8% from every 100 grams. To make it easy, what I would do for a dairy product is you look at the number of grams, and for each 100 grams, I would subtract 4 grams. I would subtract 1 teaspoon. That is a rough average. And you'll be horrified to find that some of those supposedly healthy, you know, all natural sugar, all natural, no added sugar, but added fruit or honey or whatever yogurts actually have more sugar than a Snickers bar. So just be careful. And who would like to guess how many teaspoons of sugar are in this? 32 grams. 32 grams. This is above my sugar allowance. This is what I mean by we don't even realise how much sugar we're eating. So, do you think it'd be a good idea to go into schools and teach kids how to teach your own kids, make supermarket shopping an excursion? You know, come on kids, let's grab our usual foods and let's see how much sugar we're eating. And kids will love doing it and will go, that's too much. So, great idea, I think. All right, so that's the first antidote to fructose, fibre. The second antidote, I'm not going to elaborate on this point because you all know, is fitness. The fitter a person is, the better their body, the more sensitive all their organs are to insulin, the better their muscles will handle insulin, the better their muscles will utilise sugar. the better their liver handles sugar. And as I said earlier today, even a 30 to 40 second hit before every meal will make a positive difference. And I deal with the obese population, so I don't deal with fit people in my practice. And so most of them would have a heart attack if they had a real hit. So I just say to them, before my diabetic patients, part of this too is standing. You know that sitting is also the new smoking. So the two pieces of advice I give to somebody who's really not into exercise, I mean, I eventually want to get them into exercise, but to get them started is, the first thing I say is, one of the best things for blood sugar control is to stand up for 2 minutes every 20 minutes. Make the advice very specific, because if you just go stand up regularly, like I do, I stand up for morning tea to have my biscuit, and I stand up for afternoon tea to go and have a thick shake. No, what I mean by standing up regularly is 2 minutes every 20 minutes. I'm quite religious about this. I give all my diabetic patients an alarm clock. And I say, it's got to go off every 20 minutes to remind you to stand up. And you don't have to do touch-ups on the desk. You just have to stand up. Because why is sitting so bad for our health? We get no contraction in our largest muscles, our quads and our glutes. We need contraction to get electrical activity through our muscles. And that then helps clear the fats and the sugars from our bloodstream. So standing regularly is part of the fitness, is part of the antidote. And they've actually done measured studies where when people stand, do that 2 minutes every 20 minutes, it actually improves their glycemic control. And the second thing is I get them to do a HIIT before and after every meal. So before every meal, I just say, look, walk around, just push yourself as far as you need to push yourself to get uncomfortable. And each day, increase that exertion a little bit. Make sure it never gets any easier. And what it does is it also changes a person's self-perception. So my diabetic patients, my obese patients go, I am doing something positive for myself. I can make a difference. And that I can makes a huge difference to them moving forward. Does that make sense? I mean, it sounds so basic to us, but just getting them to I just sort of go, just do this. Just do this before you open the fridge door. Do this before you open the fridge door for 30 seconds. And they'll do it because it's sort of funny. And then they start to feel better about themselves. So that's, as I said, I'm not going to labour the point because you guys are all into fitness. And for the last time, let's just stand up and do our last HIIT. And run as fast as you can for another 30 seconds. This is improving your memories. No, it does. It's one of the best things to reduce your risk of dementia. Keep going. Another 5 seconds. Okay, you can sit back down. The third F antidote to fructose is framing. What do I mean by that? I think we need to start asking our clients, is sugar really a treat or is it a trick? What do I mean by that? The way we label things profoundly influences our behaviour. The reason we think that sugar is a treat is because that's how it's been marketed to us. As long as our clients regard sugary snacks as a treat, they will feel deprived if they're not having them. They'll feel that they're resisting, they'll be exerting willpower, and it'll all be hard and they'll feel deprived. So far better that we start reframing and relabeling. So I say to them, is it really a treat, infiltrating your liver with fat, giving yourself tooth decay and eroding your brain cells? Now, is that really a treat? And it sounds dramatic, but I think the minute we start labelling things for what they are and getting honest and saying, look, it's advertising. There is no, you've heard that you need a break, you need a certain chocolate bar. Now, there is no inherent link between having a break and having that particular chocolate bar. It's how it's been marketed to us. You've heard that another chocolate bar a day helps you work, rest and play. Let me correct that for you. It blasts your brain cells away. It doesn't help you work, rest and play. It really does. And so the minute we start getting honest, without getting, pitch it at the level that your clients will accept it, but just sort of say, let's stop and say, let's pick another treat. Whenever you feel like a treat, what's something else you could turn to? And the more we have other things in our lives to look forward to, the less people will reach for sugary snacks and sugary treats. So I get all my clients, patients to write down what, food aside, what is really nurturing and nourishing to you. A massage, a manicure, a pedicure, a facial, ringing a friend, just allowing yourself to do nothing. Try that. Try just sitting there, giving yourself permission to do nothing, because we live in a society that actually makes us feel we've got to be doing something 24/7, and often it's like, oh, look, I just have something to eat and then I'm still doing something. Sometimes people just use food as an excuse to stop. Give them permission to stop and just sit there. The fourth F is focus. And this is now for people who, so I just get these really bad cravings and I really feel, I get agitated if I don't have it. There are two things people can do. One is based on the work of Jeffrey Schwartz, a leading neurologist, author of Brain Lock. And one of the things he's done with people is when a person gets that sugar craving, firstly, don't blame yourself, don't tell yourself you're weak-willed, don't tell yourself you're hopeless and you'll never get over this. Number one, just say to yourself, hey, that craving is a brain circuit that's been induced by eating foods that I wasn't aware were harmful. So immediately they distance themselves from the craving and they're not blaming themselves, and it's not a personal weakness. It's a brain circuit that's been induced that I can change. And what he's found is, in that instant, bring to mind something that makes you feel warm and fuzzy, something that makes you feel really good. It might be your honeymoon, assuming that was really good. It might be, holding your child. It might be winning an award. What makes you feel warm and fuzzy? And get them to identify that event, that memory, that feeling, there and then. And that's got to be their Pavlov's dog reaction. Every time they get that craving, they immediately counter it with that warm, fuzzy memory, feeling, event. They bring it to mind. And that gives them a dopamine hit, which therefore lessens the craving. Because the craving is for dopamine. It's not for the substance, it's for the dopamine. Does that make sense? It's a really simple, powerful thing. Or alternatively, if in that instant they can do something that makes them feel great. Even putting on a really pleasant piece of music has worked for some of my clients. Or allowing them to ring a girlfriend, or just doing something differently. So it's shifting the whole thing. The longer they delay succumbing to that craving, the better. You can actually rewire your brain to like healthy food. A lot of people don't realise this. They've done some great studies in Philadelphia where they actually put people in a scanner to identify what foods they like. And they've had, whether they're slim, average weight or overweight. They lie them in a scanner and they show them pictures of foods, and they find that, when they show them pictures of broccoli, there's not a lot of activity going on in their brains or in their pleasure centres. When they show them pictures of junk food, burgers, fries, ice creams, chocolates, their brain lights up like a Christmas tree. So they know, they can actually see what foods excite them. Then what they tell them to do is allow yourself to get really hungry. And when you're really hungry, eat really healthy food. That's when you want to eat your bowls of vegetables, your fruit, your salads, your good sandwiches, whatever it happens to be. And if you eat really healthy food when you're really hungry, you start to acquire a taste for it, because your brain now starts to link that healthy food with satisfaction and pleasure. The worst time to eat junk food and processed food is when you're really hungry, because that then creates a very strong link between satisfaction of craving and pleasure and hunger and that food. So for some people, it only takes a couple of weeks. And when they rescan their brains to check whether it's actually had an effect, because otherwise subjectively they're like, I think I prefer it. But when they scan their brains, they find that over time, the more they practice this, the more they sort of delay and then eat the healthy food, When they now show them pictures of broccoli, Brussels sprouts, more of their brain lights up. And when they show them pictures of junk food, less of their brain lights up. So you can actually retrain someone to like healthy food. They have to be motivated, but it can work. And the fifth F, antidote to fructose, is feeling. And this is probably the hardest one of all. We live in a society where comfort eating is very common for a number of reasons. And when we have that urge to comfort eat, what's happened? The brain has received a signal that is unpleasant. We're experiencing an unpleasant emotion. And the problem is we're not taught how to deal with unpleasant emotions. Our whole society is sort of geared towards you've got to feel good all the time, and if you're not feeling good, you're doing something wrong. Cheer up, come on, you've got to feel good. We're not taught to just be there and sit with our feelings. And one of the most powerful things of all is when that sugar craving comes on, or craving for any sort of comfort food, just sit there and be with the feeling. And people think, oh my God, but it's just going to overwhelm me. It won't. It's what we resist that persists. But if we just sit there with the feeling, it eventually dissolves. And it's really empowering for a person to realise they can just sit there with this sugar craving. It's not comfortable, but it won't overwhelm you. This is one of the most powerful things that my clients come back to me and say, I couldn't believe I could just sit there. Now, it wasn't pleasant, but I just sat there. I gave myself permission to sit there, feel the unpleasant feeling, and after a while it just subsided. Can take several goes. And I never say to them, don't force yourself not to have the thing, but just feel the feeling first. Oh, I think that's a hint. And I love this quote from Blaise Pascal. All of humanity's problems stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And I think that is a really valuable message, that it's okay to do nothing and to just take a pause, and we don't always have to reach for food. So my take-home messages are, firstly, sugar is a trick, not a treat. Remember that sugar is the new booze. Soft drinks are the new cigarettes. Artificial sugar is no better. Learn to play hide and seek. Eat rather than drink your fruit. And remember your 5 Fs. Fibre, fitness, framing, focus, and feelings. And before you leave, I would just like you to turn to the person sitting next to you and share the first thing that you're going to do differently, or the first thing that you're going to teach a client differently when you leave here. And then I'll just quickly close. Would anyone like to, are there any questions? Anything that I didn't answer? Anything that was unclear? Yes?
As a generalisation, would you give a limit on fruit a day, or would you say as much as you feel like?
I tend to tell my patients as much as you feel like. When I'm dealing with the obese population, just getting them to eat fruit in the first place is a good step. I don't want to deem it like fruit. I believe you can't overeat because, have you ever been cherry picking in Tasmania? A bucket of cherries, $7. I've done this once and once only. I ate so many cherries. You just can't eat too much fruit because you'll feel I think fruit will probably have you'll limit your fruit intake. Yeah. You just can't eat that much. I mean, you'd get diarrhea, you'd feel bloated. I just think you'd be struggling to overeat on fruit. Yeah.
It's not an everyday occurrence.
Yeah, exactly. And interesting, nobody will ever get addicted to fruit or vegetables. Who here loves strawberries or loves mangoes? Anyone? But would you say you're addicted to them?
Yep, raspberries.
But not in the same way as your junk food. I think my ultimate message is that, you know, you are leaders and people do so look to you and look at what you're doing even without you saying anything. So you setting the example without being preachy is, I think, the most important thing, and doing what you can in your small community. Yes?
With the 6 teaspoons of sugar, does it matter what it's made up of within the type of sugar?
The 46 that I listed that had fructose.
Right, yeah.
So even honey's got to count in your honey, caramels, syrups, fruit juice. They all count, but not whole fruit. If it's an unadulterated natural food, it doesn't count. And not your lactose, not your dairy products. But if it's flavoured milk, then yeah, you could subtract 1 teaspoon out of every 100 mils of flavoured milk. Yes?
What does wine count as?
Yes, it does. It does. Wine has sugar. Wine has...
Is that on the fruit or on that's the
Wine has fructose because it has grapes in it.
Yeah.
So wine is going to count in your sugar as well. So if you look at I don't drink alcohol, so I've actually born with a liver problem. I can't have alcohol, so I've never actually looked at the labelling on wine.
It's, you know, because it's turned into alcohol, then the percentage of sugar, if it's a really dry wine or a red wine, it's like 1% per gallon.
Okay.
And that's what they're saying. And there's red wine is the best you can drink. Champagne you can
Yes.
drink.
So you're saying is alcohol on top of your sugar?
Yeah, like when people say, oh, how much wine can I drink?
You can still have as a woman, 1 standard drink a day. Under 1.5 standard drinks a day is a safe level for women. 1 standard drink is 10 grams, 100 mils of wine a day is safe for women. And for men, it's 150 mils. Less than 2 standard drinks a day for men. Any more than that, it's not just about your liver, but any more than that increases the risk of breast cancer substantially. That's not a well-known fact.
It depends on the wine, that too, like champagne has added sugar.
Yes,
That's
true.
a whole different
Yes,
story,
it is.
like,
And your spirits have a lot of added sugar.
Yeah.
So, again, read what's in your alcohol. So I want to leave you with my favourite quote from Gandhi. No written word or spoken plea can teach another who they should be, nor all the books on all the shelves, it's who the leaders are themselves. See you tomorrow for the next instalment. I'm doing how to create a fat loss, an environment that leads to fat loss. And by environment, I'm looking at our culture, our values, not just our physical environment. So we'll continue the conversation tomorrow. And if you want more information, you can also read it in my book, Ground Floor Networking.